Voila! In view, a humble vaudevillian veteran, cast vicariously as both victim and villain by the vicissitudes of fate. This visage, no mere veneer of vanity, is a vestige of the vox populi, now vacant, vanished. However, this valorous visitation of a bygone vexation stands vivified, and has vowed to vanquish these venal and virulent vermin, vanguarding vice and vouchsafing the violently vicious and voracious violation of volition. The only verdict is vengeance, a vendetta, held as a votive, not in vain, for the value and veracity of such shall one day vindicate the vigilant and the virtuous. Verily, this vicious swirls of verbiage veers most verbose, so let me simply add that it's my very good honor to meet you, and you may call me V.
Are you like a crazy person?
Welcome to the Regular Guy Vikings Hour. Thank you for visiting the channel. And with this episode, we're actually going to be doing my NFL thoughts and predictions. And I'll be showing you my my wins formula spreadsheet, along with my offensive and defensive roster rankings. And then we're going to do some season and playoff predictions. Okay, so let's get into it. Let me pull up the spreadsheet here. Transition that over and we'll take a look at it. All right, so right off the bat, here is my wins formula for every team for the entire season and where I think they'll end up. So I've already gone over my power rankings in a previous show, so there's not necessarily a need to rehash that. So you can see everything here, and I've got, I believe, 16 different categories where I rank teams, and then I weight each one individually based on how important I think it is. And if you're looking at the columns and reading what they are and kind of thinking to yourself like, oh, what's this, what's that? Basically, you know, to kind of just break it down, what I'm doing is I'm taking historical data and then I'm adding that to what is, you know, more or less expert analysis. I weight it, you know, in terms of like what's more important. Obviously, like strength of roster, coach, quarterback, these things get weighted a little bit more heavily than, say, things like your special teams or what the media thinks of you and things of that nature. And so you're taking these things, you're taking the data, you're taking the expert analysis, you're weighting it for importance, and then you're basically just trying to project forward what you think the teams are going to do this season. And so here's where I landed with that. And instead of you know, rehashing the power rankings and going through that again and kind of like, you know, just aimlessly going through every team and what I think of each one, what I did was I went and I looked at ESPN's rankings, and then I looked for the biggest discrepancies, and I actually came up with, I think, 7 where myself and ESPN had a discrepancy of 5 or more. And so I wanted to go over those 7 particular teams and kind of you know, talk about and define what it is that is different for me compared to ESPN. And so right off the bat, yeah, so that's where we are. So right off the bat, my first team, and this is actually the biggest discrepancy between me and ESPN, is actually Chicago, who I have ranked 26th, whereas ESPN has them ranked 13th, which is a 13 spot discrepancy. That's by far the largest one out of any of the teams. So clearly ESPN and I disagree on these two teams. So I just wanted to talk about what makes me think Chicago will not be a good team this year. Okay, and this has nothing to do with there's no bias because that's the reason why I do this. Is I wanted to take bias out of it, because obviously when it comes to my own team, the Minnesota Vikings, I have you know, I drink the Kool-Aid and I wear the purple shaded glasses, so it's hard for me to really discern what it is I'm looking at or talking about when I have favoritism. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take actual data, you know, put it together, create my own spreadsheet, and come up with my own numbers. And so as you can see on the spreadsheet, I've got the Vikings ranked 17th, which is just, you know, smack dab in the middle of the pack. So clearly the numbers don't think highly of them, and not nearly as high as I think of them, but the numbers are what the numbers are. So this isn't me, you know, coming down on the Bears because I just don't like them. This is just what the numbers tell me. So anyway, let's talk about the Bears. So number one, I have the Bears offense, at least according to my rankings to start the year, ranked 24th in the league, which is basically bottom fourth, bottom quarter. They're bringing forward poor DVOA and EPA numbers from last year. They have an unproven quarterback and coach combination, which really doesn't bode well, at least not in the first year. I mean, some teams and players and coaches can overcome that kind of thing, but in this situation, they're not coming off a very good year. This is Ben Johnson's first head coaching job, and Caleb has had a lot of negative press, and so there's really not a lot of positive momentum for him right now. So overcoming the unproven quarterback and coach combination is going to be a pretty big hurdle for the Bears this year. I have them as a bottom 10 team in terms of their age. I mean, when it comes to, and I do a little age and like cap kind of like combination, just kind of analyzing the overall like health of like the roster construction. I mean, when you're talking about age, the gap is really small. We're talking about a gap of maybe like 2.5 to 3 years from the oldest team to the youngest team. But I think over time that can catch up with you. And so they are a bottom 10 team in terms of overall age of the roster. And so I think, when you're trying to make some noise, you want more of an up-and-coming roster as opposed to kind of an aging roster. So anyway, they also were coming off a year where they were bottom 10 in penalty differential. We'll see if Ben Johnson can change that, but last year they were not very disciplined. They have an extremely difficult schedule, and when you throw on top of having to play the AFC North and the NFC East like all the teams in the North do, the difference for the Bears is that, the Lions, they'll play the Packers twice, the Vikings twice, and then the Bears twice, which clearly I don't think very highly of the Bears. I see that as very winnable games for a team like the Lions. Whereas the Bears themselves, well, they don't get to play the Bears because they are the Bears. They have to play 2 games against the Lions, the Packers, and the Vikings, and these are all playoff teams from last year. So their schedule is much more daunting than the other teams in the North. Aside from the fact that they're playing the fourth place teams in the NFC West and the NFC South, which that helps a little bit, but it doesn't move the needle enough. What else? So we've got, they didn't, the media didn't really consider them to have that great of a draft. It was considered bottom half. Again, I have my own ways of figuring this stuff out. I look at a lot of different draft rankings and I put them all together and come up with my own rankings. And then, despite ESPN's love for the Bears, the bettors and the overall national media consensus, they really have the Bears more in kind of the bottom half of the league. So it seems like ESPN's kind of out on a limb on this one when it comes to thinking the Bears are going to be a playoff caliber team. And I've heard people here and there say that they think the Bears can pop up and make the playoffs, but personally, I'm not seeing it. So that's the first team that I wanted to highlight. The second team I want to highlight, we have a discrepancy of 9 spots, is the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, so here's a team that ESPN actually thinks very low of. They actually have the Raiders at 30th, whereas I have the Raiders at my 21st spot, which is a difference of 9 spots. So I'm not saying that the Raiders are going to be good this year. I think I have them predicted to win, 7 games? I mean, a 7-10 year, that's not good, but the way ESPN talks about them, they're going to finish with like 4 or 5 wins, and I just think the Raiders are better than that. So here's some of the reasons why I think that. And by the way, the reason why I have 3 teams highlighted on my spreadsheet. Number one, obviously, Minnesota, because I'm a Vikings fan, but my wife is actually a Raiders fan, and then a good friend of mine is actually an Eagles fan. So I like to highlight those 3 so I can look at those, a little bit easier than the rest. But anyway, getting back to the Raiders, even though it doesn't start off well, I actually do have the Raiders' offensive and defensive roster strength as bottom 5 in both categories, so we're not off to a great start there. But here are some reasons why I think they will overcome that. And again, just like I mentioned, we're talking about a 7-win team. I'm not predicting the Raiders make the playoffs. I'm just saying they're going to win more games than what ESPN thinks they will. So they are bringing forward a promising FPI score from last year in 2024, which means that there is some elements to the team that that they are bringing forward from last year that they could improve upon. Gino is a top half quarterback in this league. Carroll is a top half coach. I mean, I know he hasn't coached in a couple of years, but he's won a Super Bowl. He's proven himself. He is a very good coach, and the only reason why he is really only considered top half is because this is his first year back. So you could see Carroll, pushing for a top 10 spot if he really proves himself with the Raiders. Both of those guys, Geno Smith and Pete Carroll combined, really bring a certain air of respectability back to the franchise. The roster appears to be pretty well rounded in terms of age and how they manage the cap. So it looks and sounds like the management is in pretty good shape there. They're top 10 in those categories. They are a reasonably disciplined team, which is actually kind of strange for the Raiders, because my wife being a Raiders fan, they complain about penalties all the time, and so you'd think that they would be ranked last in penalty differential, but as a matter of fact, they really weren't. Even for a bad team, they were reasonably disciplined last year, and when you combine that element with an established coach and an established quarterback, I really feel like you combine all of these things, and then you add on top of that they had a pretty respectable draft, top half of the league, and I think that is enough to get the Raiders to 7 wins this year, as opposed to what ESPN thinks, which is 4 or 5, and ranking 30th in the league out of 32 teams, which is kind of crazy in my opinion. I think there's several teams much more deserving of being ranked much lower than the Raiders. Okay, so now we're getting to my third largest discrepancy, which actually is our own beloved Minnesota Vikings, where ESPN had them actually ranked 9th, which I actually really appreciate the respect there, but my own rankings had them coming out at 17th, which is a difference of 8 spots, okay? And I just want to get into, even though I love my team, I can't make the numbers. I can't, squeeze them and force them to tell me something that they're not telling me. So here, just based on what I'm looking at, here are some of the reasons why I think Minnesota fell to the middle of the pack in my win predictions, or my wins formula. So the defense is expected to be very good. I think I have them ranked 2nd in the league, but the offense is expected to be middle of the pack. I had them at 14th, and just in terms of offensive roster talent. And when you kind of look at the offense, because I just sat there and thought to myself, like, man, it feels like we have a lot of good players. What's the deal with that? And Jefferson's not coming off one of his elite years. He was a top 10 receiver last year, but I think he placed 9th in PFF grade, which isn't his typical self. He's usually like top 3. But you take him, you take Darisaw, who's coming off the torn ACL, and it sounds like he's probably going to play in week 1 against Chicago, but it might be a little bit slow going at the beginning. You take those 2 guys, who are basically our 2 best players on offense, at least according to PFF grades. Beyond that, we have a lot of just very good players, but really no highly rated, like, superstar level players like the other 2. And I mean, listen, having 2 superstars on your offense, I think you're doing better than most. So no complaints here, and that's why they're at 14th. I think also part of the problem is that we're being dragged down by the fact that we just have an unproven quarterback who just has literally never played in the NFL before. So, if there was a quarterback in among those roster rankings who, played even at like a top 12 to 16 level, I think, that ranking probably bumps a little bit and gets them maybe closer to the top 10. But as it is, we have to wait until our quarterback proves himself. So until then, I can't raise the bar just yet. And just speaking of, of the quarterback, our quarterback rank is 27th. And here, let me highlight the bar here. So that's right here, 27th. And again, the reason why he's ranked 27th, and just so you, just in case you would watch the other episode where I actually rattled off my quarterback rankings heading into the year. My quarterback rankings and then my quarterback rank on the wins formula are different because I add in some extra stuff to kind of finagle that number. So McCarthy was actually 30th in my quarterback rankings, but the Vikings are ranked 27th in quarterback ranks. So they rose up just a little bit for various reasons, various different numbers and things like that I threw in. But when you have the 27th ranked quarterback out of 32 teams, I mean that's going to drag down your statistics when you're doing data analysis like this. And there's really nothing we can do about it. We have to wait for the guy to play. He was injured. He missed an entire year. He hasn't played a meaningful snap of football aside from preseason in a year and a half. So again, he's got to get on the field. He's got to show it. He's got to prove it, and then we will know what we really have. And I personally think we do not have the 27th worst, best, however you want to put it, quarterback in the league. But again, he has to go out and prove it. So he's just a literal unknown with zero historical data to pull from. Yeah, so that's my note on that. Okay, so there's more. Our roster is on the older side. There's no denying that. And especially on the defense. I know a majority of the defense, the ages of the guys range between 27 and 32 years old. Our health rank is more or less kind of middle of the pack. That's a really hard to discern thing, but I have a couple of different websites and data points that I use to come to that number. But even though we are pretty healthy right now, we really shouldn't pretend that it's not a legitimate concern, because there are players, lots of players actually on the roster right now with very recent injury history, and it's all over the roster. And so you can't ignore that. I think our chances, I mean, obviously injuries are difficult to predict, they're impossible to predict. But when you combine injury history with age, you start to kind of get a little bit, you can glean some information off of that and think it's probably not likely, but I would say more likely than most that the Vikings will deal with some injuries this year because of that information. So here's some other things. So again, just like I talked about with the Bears, we are playing a very difficult schedule. We rank in the bottom 10 in strength of schedule, and I'm actually going to talk about that at length. I'm actually going to do an entire episode about the schedule, just the schedule. So I will go over that. But yeah, we have a very tough schedule this year, and as much sorry, and just to wrap up that schedule thought was this: the strength of schedule is that when you just look at last year's winning percentage, or like who made the playoffs last year, and you just decide that a schedule is tough because of those reasons, that's not really a good reason, at least not in my opinion, to say, oh, that's a tough schedule. But when you look deeper at our schedule and you look at the number of quality coaches and the number of quality quarterbacks that we have to play, you start to understand that there's really no getting around the fact that this schedule is just going to be tough. Whether or not winning percentages or playoff teams match that information, which it does, but the quarterbacks and the coaches show me proof that yes, we do actually have a legitimate difficult schedule this year. Okay, so moving on to coach. As much as we, the fans, the media, and the NFL at large think highly of Kevin O'Connell as a coach, he remains outside of the top 10 because he has not won in the playoffs. And if you want to crack the top 10, you have to win in the playoffs, and he simply hasn't done that. He has an amazing regular season record. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I think we've won 2/3 of our games since he's been the coach, but you have to win in the playoffs. That's what gets you into that upper echelon. So he's an above average coach according to the rankings, but he's not yet a high-end elite coach, again, according to the rankings. So he wasn't able to pull up, our data and then drive us further up the rankings on this on the wins analysis. So Let's see. Yeah, and then our special teams. It remains a weakness. It is consistently bottom half of the league, and it has been for several years now. I think it's going to be better this year, but the historical data is telling me that they have to go out there and prove it because, and I have them at 19th, so that's actually better than I thought. But they just haven't had a really good just overall special teams unit in quite some time. So I'm hoping that changes. And then finally, the media and the betting community, and all of the analysts, by and large, they consider us pretty average. Vegas put us at 8.5, so that's exactly in the middle. And you add all of those things up, you put all that stuff together, all those question marks that we have, and it lands you at 17th on the rankings. So I do disagree with this personally. I actually think that we belong probably about 5 spots higher than this. I just wish that the data would agree with me, but it doesn't, and so. I have to trust the numbers, but I think we're going to outperform this, and last year I kind of fell into the same thing where I think I had the Vikings ranked in the 20s because, again, there was just so many question marks. At that time, O'Connell was coming off kind of a poor year because of all the quarterback injuries and that whole circus, and Sam Darnold, nobody was really loving him as a potential guy to come in and make some noise, and but we went out and we won 14 games. So pretty impressive, and they certainly outperformed. I think they ended up ranking in the top 5 or close to it in my end of season rankings. And I mean, when I started the year, I think I had them at like 24th or something like that. So I hope they do that again this year. I hope they way outperform my expectations again this year. All right, moving on to the next team that I have, which is the Los Angeles Chargers. And we saw a little bit of this on Friday night. ESPN had them at 14. I actually have them at 7. So that's a discrepancy of 7 spots. And so let's talk about why I love the Chargers. Let's go ahead and highlight them. So right off the bat, I have them as the 8th best defense in terms of roster rank. Last year's advanced statistics all point toward continued improvement. They have a top 5 quarterback, in my opinion, and Justin Herbert played like one on Friday. He looked great. It's a really well-structured roster. Harbaugh came in and really set a tone with that team. They were a top 5 penalty differential team last year. He brought respectability back to the leadership of that team, and it just really showed with the team's performance. And I know they had a brutal playoff game. I'm not sure what happened there. That was the worst game Herbert's ever played in his career. That's not the kind of game you would expect from a Harbaugh team, especially against the Texans, who I didn't really think were that great last year. I don't expect that to happen again. I think that was a blip on the radar. So basically, other than what was considered mostly an underwhelming draft, and then of course you have the Rashawn Slater injury, which really hurts them, but they moved Joe Alt to left tackle, and he seems to be doing fine. I don't know who's on the right side, but he seemed to do well enough, so it looks like they're not hurting too horribly at the tackle position, even with the loss of an all-pro level guy like Slater. But there aren't really any categories that I can see for the Chargers that really drag them down. So they've got this high-end quarterback. They have this really respectable coach. They've got really good talent on defense, and there's really no categories where they're bad. And so you really can't convince me that the Herbert-Harbaugh combo isn't top of the league, and I have them at 7th. Again, I think people are just really living in the past, and they have that a bad taste in their mouth from that playoff loss, and I think they're letting that linger into the year. And it's a fresh year, and I think the Chargers are going to make some noise this year. Definitely a playoff team, and probably a team who gets into the divisional round, maybe even challenges for the AFC Championship. You never know. Okay, so we have, how many we got left? We got 3, and I actually have a decent amount of notes on the next team, which is the New York Giants. ESPN likes them a little bit more than I do. They had them at 25. I've got the Giants at 31, the second worst team in the league. That's a difference of 6 spots. So let me just talk about why I don't like the Giants this year. All right, so I didn't see a ton of roster improvement. I had them as my worst offense and defensive rosters heading into the year last year, and I mean, they didn't really prove me wrong, to be honest with you. This year, the offense doesn't look much better, but the defense actually did jump 10 spots, and I think it's just from sheer talent alone. But it's still at this point just a theory, okay? So everyone's really kind of getting excited about the defensive line, right? Because you started off with Dexter Lawrence. You have a proven pass rusher in Brian Burns. You have a pretty good pass rusher in Thibodeau. And then you add like a potential superstar guy like an Abdul Carter. And in theory, that looks great, but they have to go out and they have to prove it on the field. Burns is very good, but he's probably a little bit like a Grenard light kind of a guy where he's right there. But he's not necessarily a game wrecker. He's just a good, consistent pass rusher. And then, is it Thibodeau? I'm not totally sure how you pronounce it, but he has not lived up to the draft slot to this point. He hasn't been bad, but he's just been good, okay to good. And he has shown improvement, and so I think they really need him to start to ascend if they want to make that D-line go from just good to great. He has shown promise, though, but just nowhere near the dominance you would expect from a top 5 pick, which I think they are expecting from Abdul Carter. So moving on to the next page here. If Carter plays like maybe on the level of a guy like a Myles Garrett, then yes, that changes everything. Suddenly that defensive line goes to, outstanding. Probably the top defensive line in the league, and something that every single team that plays them has to deal with. But it's still up in the air. It's still TBD. So you never know. They had terrible advanced stats last year. They have a bad quarterback situation. Yes, Jackson Dart maybe could come in at some point and prove the doubters wrong and have a great year. Maybe Dable develops him the way he did Josh Allen and they turn things around. We don't know, but again, it's still just a theory. Right now you're dealing with Russell Wilson, you're dealing with Jameis Winston. Those guys, they don't move the needle for me. Dable is more or less on the hot seat. He might not even make it half a season if he doesn't start the year well. They have quite possibly the hardest schedule in the entire NFL, which for a bad team with not a great quarterback situation, that does not bode well. Even with a really good defense, if you can't score points, you can't win games. There's no respect for them, hardly at all, from the bettors in the media. And they came away with a bottom 10 special teams last year. So, as mentioned above, their draft, when you consider Abdul Carter and Jackson Dart, it was universally loved. But they are pinning their hopes on these rookies because everything else, when you look at everything else, except for a few talented guys on the defensive line, I'm not so sure it's enough to save Dable's job. I think, maybe 31's a little bit too low, but that's where my numbers came out at. I think they just don't have enough offense to win games despite the defense. So anyway, that's how I feel about the Giants. So we've got 2 more of these. We're looking at now the Seattle Seahawks. ESPN had them at 21. I have them at 16. Let me get a drink real quick. I'm parched. Okay. So the reason why I like Seattle a little bit more, we have a difference of 5 spots. I like their defense. They're near top 10 for me. They have very respectable analytical data coming from last year, which means that McDonald is moving this team in the right direction. They have a fairly easy schedule, although I personally think the NFC West is going to be pretty tough. But like middle of the pack tough, like 8, 9, 10 wins tough. There's really no like elite dominant teams in that division. They have an excellent special teams and they had what was considered a near top 10 draft, so they were right up there. Darnold is clearly still unproven, and he had one great year with O'Connell in Minnesota, but now he goes to Seattle and he has to prove himself all over again, so I'm on the fence about that. McDonald is also still basically an unproven coach. He is moving the team in the right direction, but again, we will see. You have to continue to move it forward. So will these two guys hold them back, or will they push them forward? We don't know. But I think it's enough to at least get them to middle of the pack, and I think a little bit more highly of them. The data that I'm looking at, though, it does show that they are a solid team and they have potential, and I think that they could definitely at least play at middle of the pack level in the NFL. So that's how I feel about Seattle. And then my last team, the Jaguars, ESPN had at 27. I have them at 22, a difference of 5 spots. I have them higher. And ESPN thinks they're going to be a bottom feeder. I think they're going to be a little bit better. This is kind of sort of the same as I was talking about with the Raiders, where they think they're going to win like 4. I think they'll win like 6 or 7. And just some of the things, starting off with Jacksonville, I honestly don't really love the overall roster talent. They're bottom half of the league, according to my rankings, in both offense and defense, but they are a well-structured team, and they are healthy. And so it looks like management is doing a pretty good job with the roster at this point, pointing them in the right direction. They do play in the worst division in football by a mile, and so you couple that with having a great special teams, and they were considered to have had a top 10 draft. Despite the low roster rankings and the overall hate from the bettors in the media for the coach, and the fact that Lawrence hasn't really developed into that franchise guy that everyone expected, I actually see a little bit of hope here, and I think that at the very least, they have a quarterback in Lawrence who has the physical abilities to flip that switch at any time. And if he starts to play like a top 10 quarterback, then you'll see this team rise up the ranks quickly. So Lawrence still offers that team hope. And this new offensive coach that they brought in, he's really highly thought of. He comes from the McVay. And if him and Lawrence click, you could see the Jags, not just go as high as 22, which is what I'm thinking, but maybe even higher. So I just think that they're better. I don't think they're going to be drafting in the top 5 again. I think they're better than that. I think they're closer to a 20th type ranked team in the NFL, which, again, I know that they are kind of sort of, if Lawrence ends up being the kind of quarterback that they want to hang on to long term, which I know he's already signed his second contract, but I just mean, beyond that, if he shows something and if they show something, then maybe the Jaguars can actually maybe start to throw their hat in the ring with some of those other teams in the AFC, like the Chiefs and the Bills and the Ravens and the Chargers and the Bengals, and get back to where they were 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago, maybe it was 3 years ago, when they won that playoff game. So the hope is there, the potential is there for the Jags. So anyway, moving on now. I'll show you my offensive and defensive ranks, just so you kind of get an idea of what I think of the teams. I have Baltimore as the best offense in the league. I have Philly as the best defense in the league. Again, this is based on what I consider to be roster strength, the players, strictly the players. Detroit's got a great offense. Buffalo's got a great offense. The Bucs have a great offense. The Packers have a great offense. Over here, the Vikings have a great defense. Denver, Pittsburgh, Houston, all great defenses. And then just some of your bottom feeders, the Browns, the Titans, the Giants, the Patriots, terrible offenses. And then over here, Panthers, Cowboys, Jaguars, Raiders, terrible defenses. So I know I spoke a little bit highly of the Jaguars and the Raiders, but it looks like Geno Smith and Trevor Lawrence are going to be having to overcome a lot of bad defensive play this year. So hopefully you had a chance to look at that. I want to get to my predictions, and I can put my paper away now. Here are my predictions for the season and for the playoffs. And I have to admit, I really, really hate that my playoffs went so chalk, because I was really hoping this would be the year that my data would tell me that the Ravens or the Bills were going to win the Super Bowl. But as it turns out, the damn thing had the Chiefs and the Eagles in the Super Bowl again. So My playoff teams in the AFC: Buffalo wins the East, Baltimore wins the North, Houston wins the South with only 7 wins, which is hilarious, and the Chiefs win the West with 12 wins. My 3 wildcard teams are the Bengals, the Broncos, and the Chargers. And then it just, as you can see over here with my playoff scenarios, it looks like I've got Denver beating Houston. Obviously, Baltimore's the number 1 seed. I've got Kansas City beating the Chargers, and I've got Buffalo beating the Bengals, which then leads to these 2 divisional matchups: Denver at Baltimore, Kansas City at Buffalo. And then I have Baltimore winning, Kansas City winning, and those 2 teams meeting in the AFC Championship. But then I have the Chiefs barely squeaking out a win against the Ravens, unfortunately, because I would love to see Lamar finally get a ring. But anyway, the data says what the data says. And I actually do, if you see my tab down here, playoff wins formula, I actually do change the formula a little bit for the playoffs specifically, because there's a lot of data that I don't need that pertains more to the regular season. So I condense it down, I weight it a little bit differently, and it changes the formula for the playoffs. And so I'll show you that in a second. So in the NFC, I have the Eagles winning the East, the Lions winning the North, the Bucks winning the South easily, and the Rams winning the West by just a smidge. And then in your 3 wildcard teams, I actually have the Commanders, the Packers, and the Cardinals. Now, as you can see, I don't have the Vikings making the playoffs according to this, but I actually, on a personal level, do think the Vikings are going to win 10 and get into the playoffs. And I'll talk more about this when I talk about the team, and potentially even win a playoff game. So on the NFC side of it, you've got the Eagles with the number 1 seed. In the wild card round, you have the Cardinals at the Lions, the Commanders at the Bucks, the Packers at the Rams, which then leads to a divisional round matchup of the Commanders at the Eagles and the Rams at the Lions. And then it looks like I do have a small upset here. I have the Rams, the Lions going out in the divisional round yet again. The Rams actually winning and then meeting the Eagles yet again in the playoffs. Except this time it'll be in the NFC Championship game, but the Eagles will prevail. They will go on to meet the Chiefs in the Super Bowl and then lose this time to the Chiefs. So I have the Chiefs as my Super Bowl winner. I don't like that. I didn't want to predict that. I wish that it didn't, but again, the numbers are what the numbers are. So I just gotta grin and bear it. It's a little bit too chalk for my taste. That's the Chiefs. The Chiefs in the Super Bowl for a 4th consecutive year. How do you like that? All right, so here's my playoff formula. I ranked each team that I thought would make the playoffs 1 through 14. And so as you can see here, Kansas City came out at a 0.7, and Baltimore came out at a 0.78. So it was really close, but Kansas City came out on top. And then just for kicks, I wanted to go ahead and throw Minnesota into the formula just to see where they'd come out. And it looks like when I throw them into the mix with the other playoff teams, they actually come out at 12th. So that might be enough to get a playoff win. I don't know. But, wow, that actually went on a little bit longer than I expected here. But still way less than an hour, so that's good. So anyway, so there is your NFL Thoughts and Predictions show. And as always on this show, let's get that transition going. There it is. As always on this show, we say, play vicious and be victorious. Peace. Thanks for watching the Regular Guy Vikings Hour. If you enjoyed this video, please interact with my content, such as liking, subscribing, or even commenting. And when you're done with that, come say hello to me over on my social media platforms. Thanks.